Welcome to the Heat of Command podcast, mastering the art of fire service leadership.
Where we, your hosts, aim to teach you how to use introspection and self-reflection to be your most authentic, genuine self, leader, and human being.
And now, here are your hosts. This is Kyle Matusik.
And Carrie Henderson. Thanks for joining. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. And today we are going to go in a little bit different direction. Maybe it's just kind of the same direction we go in. But we want to talk today about when agencies, and not just fire service, but Kyle has been seeing this in the private sector, and I've witnessed this as well. When agencies or companies try to hold people accountable and try to have every decision anyone would ever have to make be written down in a policy and procedures manual or some sort of SOG or guideline, so that, and I think it happens, and Kyle, you can get into this more since you've really been working in the private sector more, when you kind of want to take away the liability. So you want to write everything down, if then this. So like, if someone does this, this is the repercussion, or thou shalt not do this. And you have to memorize all these policies and procedures, and then the fallout of that. So we want to get into today, when you work for a place that is very policy driven, what happens to your decision-making ability and what happens to your leadership style? Because I've seen this happen with folks. So in my department, we have historically been a very, we've had very few policies, very few SOGs, very few policies. And we kind of made decisions based on what was the right thing to do. Now that backfired on us sometimes, because things aren't always consistent, and sometimes people aren't doing the right thing in certain situations, but it's worked out pretty good for us. And then we will get folks that come from other departments, bigger cities, that have those huge policies and procedures manuals that you have to download on like a disc and you can't even print out because it would kill all the trees. And they come to us and they're like, well, how am I supposed to hold anyone accountable? There's no policy that says they can or can't do that thing. I need you to write a policy that says you can't do this so that I can hold them accountable. And then the discussions we have to have about how actually, yes, you can hold them accountable because that is your job to do so. So what do you think, Kyle?
Oh yeah, we're gonna get going on this one. This is I think it's a big societal problem that we see. And it's multifaceted in terms of responsibility and where responsibility lies. Right? We live in such a litigious society, so everybody's afraid of getting sued. Me and you talked in depth on the blame game. Everybody likes to blame everybody else and not take responsibility for their own actions. And I think when we live in a world where we have created processes for everything you do, every job, everything, and you have taken the human factor out of it, which is what I think we see in a lot of the workforce. Now, that is extremely dangerous in our industry, where seconds matter and critical decision-making is a vital component of our job. And if you take the human aspect out of that and try to make everything a process, lives will be lost because of it. So how do we go back? How do we go back and enable our people to be people, human beings, train them well, and enable them to make critical decisions without worrying about a policy or procedure during that high, intense, stressful time? Needless to say, and well, maybe you don't know, and then you read some of these policy and procedure manuals and SOGs, and they're like 1,000 pages long. Like, nobody's going to memorize all that. But it's just this tool to blame somebody. Now, let's go back a little bit further in time, if you would. When you used to think of a leader, right, a leader of an organization, it was a person who would take responsibility for everything that happened. Everything. That's your job. If people messed up, why didn't you train them well enough? If people made a mistake, why didn't you do this? So to alleviate that, we create policies and procedures instead of doing what we need to be doing. And now we're in this day and age. Are leaders out there taking responsibility for everything that happens in their organization, or are they trying to create avenues to pass blame? and I would say the latter, and I've almost seen that change throughout my career in the military and coming into the fire service. It's like nobody wants the responsibility. Everybody wants somebody to blame. And in doing so, we have created a society that is just process driven instead of human being driven. And it's like when you actually could sit back and watch that, and I'll tell you, in the private sector, it's like clear as day, and then to actually apply some of the things that I've seen, and you look at within our industry and you're like, it's the same thing. And it's dangerous because like I said, we need critical decision makers on the fireground and emergency scenes. You need that. That is a vital component, and we can't policy and procedure ourselves out of every single scenario. There's no way. It's impossible. But we develop people, right? We encourage people and we develop strategies to allow them to make decisions. And when they make a mistake, and as a leader of that person that we have, been putting our time and effort to, and they make an honest mistake, like, we bear that responsibility, and I understand mistakes could happen and lives are on the line. Like, I get that, but that's why you take a leadership role. Right? I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking silly. Maybe I don't make sense to a lot of people, but like, that's the way I look at it. That's what should be going on, and it's not. It's like the complete opposite. And we're just as society, we're just going deeper and deeper and deeper the wrong way. We need to bring the human value back into especially this job, but into all jobs, and allow people to be free thinkers and allow them to use their minds. And, we just don't need a process so we could blame them and sue them if something goes wrong, because that's what it feels like. I don't know.
I'm just jotting stuff down so I don't forget, because there's so many things that come into my mind when I think about this. But when you brought up, the litigious society, and it's interesting because in my career coming up, when I was a young firefighter, it was drilled into us like, you need to do this because we could get sued.
Yeah.
Or we can't do this. We can't hold people accountable or say these things, so in the firehouse and on calls, it was just always this, like, in the back of my mind, this culture of, we could get sued. We could get sued by the public. We could get sued by, a firefighter could sue, each other. It never happened. Like, it very, very rarely, very, very rarely happens. And now the position that I'm in, and I work with some some very new age thinking folks. And so it's like, why did we act like that? Because, and yes, people do get sued.
Mm-hmm.
But like, for me now, it's like, if I'm doing the right thing, right? And if I'm trying, at least I'm trying to do the right thing, I'm acting in the best interest of the people, the best interest of the public, the best interest for the department. That's not gross negligence, right? If I'm trained and I'm trying to do the right thing, if I get sued, sometimes, because we're in a litigious society, sometimes that's BS. It's lawsuits are total BS sometimes, and it's okay, but you can't make decisions. You can't make all of your decisions with that fear, because then you're just paralyzed and you don't do anything that is really, really good, right? Because you're like, oh, I might get sued. Can't do that. Can't do that. Can't do that. Might get sued. And it's like, no, like, and you can always call, like, we have our county attorney, and the county attorney's office is very easy to talk to. So, like, if we have something that, like, we're kind of working through, we call them and we say, hey, what do you think about this? And they're like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. Or, hey, give me some more information. Or, if you do that, these are the kind of things, like, he would need to defend us. So it's so interesting, the culture shift. I'm hoping other departments will kind of see what we're trying to do too, because I think so many people are still stuck in that we could get sued, so whatever. And it's just this paralyzation of decision making and not good leadership, because it's very rare. And if you do get sued and you're doing the right thing, you probably have a pretty good leg to stand on, right? So yeah, that's my soapbox on that.
Yeah, you're so true about, all the education, like, early on in our careers, and that's all you heard. You're going to get sued, right? Because it was like that time where everything was changing, right? Because it used to be sovereign immunity, right? The king can
Yeah.
do no wrong, and there was nothing wrong you can do. And then it's like started to change. Like, no, there is a lot wrong. And I totally agree with it. Like, if you're negligent, sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
But everything has, everything we do has, there's a cause and effect for everything. And so, a lot of times when we start instituting things on a grand scale, we don't understand the true consequences. But now you look at within some organizations, and all they work on is trying to protect themselves rather than developing strategies to become better at the job.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
And that is the dangerous area, and the biggest thing for me, just looking at everything is just like, man, and you look at, it's such a domino effect. And we look at recruiting and retention, why people aren't coming into our job. And then we start having this discussion. Well, everything's a process. We take the human aspect out of it, our culture, blah, blah, blah. There's just so much going against us. It's like, when are we going to stop this bleeding and like say, hey, something's not working. We got to turn some things around, and I think that free thinking of people and enabling them and giving them the tools, the knowledge, and the confidence to be able to think in the scenarios that we find ourselves in. Like, you have to do that instead of, the policy for every type of incident. Now, I'm not saying policies are a bad thing, right? Extremely detailed ones, probably pretty bad. But your basic policies for a general understanding of what we do on, two-story residential fire versus a high-rise fire, sure. On a single ALS EMS call versus a 20-patient EMS call, sure. And especially if you have your mutual aid partners and your surrounding neighborhood and villages that are working with you, it's important to have some of that. But it just seems to me that it's coming from the wrong place, and these strategies are in place for protection rather than building our people and growing an industry. And I think that's where things could get extremely dangerous for us, because you take I tend to think so. In the private sector, I do some disaster preparedness stuff, and I've had some opportunities to go and speak in terms of that. And the one thing that I kind of allude to a lot is, would you rather have an organization, an agency, whatever, a village, municipality, a hospital, on paper, like prepared to the T? They meet every regulatory requirement, they check all the boxes. But the person that's the incident command for the tornado that went through town and created havoc has zero critical thinking ability. They just lean on the policies and procedures and can't make a decision to save their life. But yet you are very prepared. Or would you rather have somebody in the incident command role who is a sharp thinker, knowledgeable, can make critical decisions in high stress situations, but your preparation, you didn't meet accreditation requirements. You didn't check all those boxes. You don't have enough, gowns in your disaster storage area. Like, which one do you want leading your incident?
Yeah. And
Right?
I have seen this firsthand in several examples that I can think of. So, and I'll start with our own department and kind of what happened with us. So, we were one of the only departments probably in our area that had no tactical guidelines or like playbooks or order of arrival stuff written down. I, almost everyone else around us did. And I don't know if we were kind of against it. And we're like, the company officers show up and Kyle, you're frozen. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry. So it was the thought that, we had some really old school captains and officers and the thought was, our guys are good critical thinkers. They're going to make the decision as they pull up and it's just going to work out. And for the most part, it usually did. We just kind of winged it most of the time. So then we decide, so and I think part of that was there are jurisdictions near us that had a checklist for literally everything, like a procedure and policy for every single thing that they did on the fire ground and on every single call. And they couldn't get past it. They couldn't make decisions. They couldn't call an audible. They would get out of their trucks and they were just And we watched that happen. We're like, well, we don't want to be like that. But we did really need some stuff because we had a bunch of new officers that didn't have a ton of experience. So we needed kind of this balance. So, several years ago, we started writing technical guidelines or order of arrival stuff. And it's the very first line of every single tactical guideline says nothing in this guideline replaces the critical thinking company officer, because we want people to still have that ability to make the decision that it's not always going to be how it is on this paper, and you need to be empowered to change it, and us support you if it's the right, right, if it's based on, the right thing. So, and if it's not, we'll talk through that too. But what happened with us was it worked out really good because we had all these folks that were so used to doing all kinds of critical thinking because there was nothing written down, and now we had enough written down that we didn't have to talk on the radio as much. So it was like this, once we got it kind of all worked out and figured out, like, it works super, super, super well. But I have seen so many agencies that have so much script and so much direction written down that, like, just like you said, it really, they have no experience making decisions anything other than if it goes exactly like it's on this paper. So I took a class years ago. I think it was, might have been when I was a captain, and it was a battalion chief from DC, and I think Chief Carroll was his name, and he was talking about their tactical guidelines and how that works. And they've had tactical guidelines for years and years and years. And what he was saying is when their guys arrive out of order, sometimes they can't overcome that because they're so used to those tactical guidelines. And back then, this has been years ago, their BC, the chief en route, gave them assignments, and he wasn't even on scene yet. So that's an example, of exactly what we're talking about and how this plays out in the real world on fire scenes. But it also plays out in the firehouse too.
Oh yeah.
So another example I can think of is, so we get folks occasionally that will come from other departments that are very used to all of the policy, everything's written down, what you can and cannot do at work. And when these folks get promoted, they're like, well, how do I hold somebody accountable if it's not written down in a policy? Like, there's nothing that says in here that people can't go to sleep before, 5, 6 p.m. How do I tell them they can't? I'm like, you just tell them they can't, that your expectation is they can't. And they're like, well, what if they go to HR? I'm like, then you tell HR, I told them they can't go to sleep before 5 p.m. It doesn't need to be written down in a policy. I promise you don't want a policy for every single thing. You have the authority to tell them that. And so it's very interesting. I've had that exact conversation.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, maybe here back in Illinois, that'd be a little more challenging because, like, I think of that scenario going to bed and you see the union members saying, well, it's not in the contract, right? And like, but yeah, right. So then you use grievance and arbitration and that's where both sides are at fault, right? I'm not just blaming, all the administration for the excessive policies and procedures. There's a reason why they went that route. It's a full circle thing here, and everybody's involved and everybody's got their hand in the game because everything has happened because of things that have been witnessed or things that have gone on in our industry. So that, thinking that this is the way out of it, proceduring ourselves out of it might have been the way. And, when those decisions were made, maybe on the surface look like a great idea, but I think it's really hurting a lot of places. But the same is at the lower end, just coming in and not really knowing what to do, and smaller organizations and not having any kind of guidance on anything or to hold people accountable. Like the union stuff, like that's a big thing for us up here. Like if it's not in a policy, they're going to have a tough time, trying to stand up and discipline somebody if it's not written down somewhere. So therein lies some challenges, but there comes a litigious society and, all this, the blame. And it's like, but it's just hurting our industry so much. And it doesn't have to be that way, I guess. But I totally get when we institute all these policies and procedures. I think one of the biggest things I see is those, you hit on it, the people who are just like dead set on those. And if the second a thing changes that's not in the policy, they're done. like they're gone because they can't think through, they can't overcome. So there's just a lot of challenges with it. And, I'm not saying that we're right or anything, but you just start looking and just go in your organizations and examine this, examine this idea and look at the things on policies and procedures and the why behind it. Like, why are we doing all this? And I think for the most part, at the end of the day, it's a protection, right? It's an us versus them. It's to discipline. Is it really to better our efforts as firefighters? Because my opinion, if we want to better our firefighters to do the job, it's not more policies and procedures. It's enabling them to work and to make decisions. And as leaders, it's having a training program that instills those values. Like, how did we get so far off from that? I don't know. And it's so simple when we sit here and talk about it. And I know execution is a whole nother thing. But we've just taken a lot of, like I said, the human aspect out of things by creating these processes. And it's crazy. It's crazy, Carrie. And it's something I've been thinking about like the last week or two, like I told you before we got on. And it's just like, then the question is, how do you get out of this? I have no idea.
Well, it's interesting. You're talking about a training model that really empowers decision making. And I'd love for if any of our listeners are currently working in working with I'm having a total brain fart, but like in basic training, like current folks that, or if you've recently been through basic training or part somehow affiliated with anything in basic training, because I know the model has changed completely where, they used to strip those folks down and they didn't get to make any of their own decisions. And they found that young soldiers and sailors and stuff coming out, they couldn't make any decisions because they weren't allowed to, and they didn't know how to. So then now what I understand is it's okay, here's your task in basic. Like, all right, you have to clean this whole mess hall with your group. Go do it. Like, and it starts with little decisions, like, but where before it was, you'll mop this square, like not,
Oh
and
yeah, I
I
know.
know that's not accurate, but like it's
That
similar to
could be
that. But it's
accurate.
like, okay, so now it's okay, here's your task. It's a seemingly insignificant task, but you have to figure out ways to get it done. And then it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. So they come out empowered to make some decisions, but still, tough mindset and all that stuff that stayed in that model. But that's what we have to do, and that's what we have to do starting at the recruit level and company officer training is, I don't need to tell you step by step by step. I need to show you how to do the task and then let you screw it up doing it, and then put it into some sort of scenario where you make the decisions and it's realistic, and just keep building. Because if not, it if, like you said, we're probably the top job, the top career where we have to be able to call an audible, and we have to be able to be critical thinkers. And gosh,
We're
the
just
more
taking that ability
we
away, though,
totally are
right?
sometimes, and I watch it and can't blame people. If we never let somebody make a decision and then you're like, boom, you're a company officer, good luck. Like, okay.
But that's how it goes, right? And
Yeah.
then you do something wrong, and then they're going to hold you accountable because you didn't follow policy or procedure. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, what?
Well,
It's so backwards.
what worries me too is there are policies and procedures that are necessary to be
Oh
written
yeah,
down.
yeah,
If there's stuff like, I think specifically about stuff like, if you wreck a piece of apparatus,
yeah.
when the accident report needs to be turned in, who needs to be notified, drug and alcohol testing, if that's a thing, like who needs to do the investigation, like that stuff. But unfortunately, if you have 1,000 policies, that one's lost in the weeds.
Yeah.
So the ones that you need people to actually know, or know at least have a general idea of, get lost in the weeds if you operate like that. Like our SOG manual, standard operating guideline manual, is red, yellow, and green coded. So red ones you need to know. You just need to know those. Yellow, you might have some time. They're not as critical, but they're still So red and yellow are all operational guidelines. Red, you must know. Yellow, you might be able to look at, but they're still relating to stuff in operations. Green or admin procedures, you go look those up. Like, I don't want you to guess those, go look them up. But that's how we've set them up. So when you're learning them, you know what's a priority.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah. Simple.
Yeah.
Simple. Mhm.
Right. Because it's you used to, like I said, you start to think about, and we talk about training and enabling people to make mistakes. I think is huge. That's how they learn. And that the only thing I would say to that is they shouldn't make the same mistakes you've made. Let them make new ones. If they're making the same mistakes you made, then you're not doing your job well enough. But I think that's such a learning tool, and that's what the training ground is for. But again, that goes back into other episodes and stuff of our culture, how people are afraid to make mistakes. And yeah, just that critical decision making has become like this huge thing that I've just kind of been thinking about, and how, because in private sector, right, like they have no critical thinking, because it's rare, right? And how you institute that and try to build that, and then you look within our organizations and our industry, and you're like, how are we doing there? And then how do you start to change that? How do you teach people how to critically decision make when you're just loaded with policies and procedures for every type of incident? You don't. You just have these outlandish expectations that if they mess something up, you're going to hold them accountable because they didn't meet what was on paper. But at the end of the day, what they did was for the benefit of everybody involved. And you get in that trick bag sometimes. You break policy to do what's best, and they're still going to hang you out to dry. So it's just it's a very interesting thing for me to look at and examine, and it's I understand why. Like, I get it. I get why we've come this way, and why it is part of our world today. But it's got to stop, and we got to start moving back in the other direction. When people start talking about we need the old fire service back, maybe not the old culture, but yeah, the way we used to operate to some extent. Yeah, let people think and do. Like, a lot of people that come into our profession, they just want to do. They want to go out, they want to work, they want to, develop and do the best that they can. They don't come into the fire service saying, I want to ruin everything, and provided a little direction and good training, that's what we get. But there's a lot of challenges in order to overcome. Like, I don't know if you're in one of those organizations that have those positive, how to overcome that. I have no idea.
So I think it's interesting too. I spent a lot of time with recruits. Obviously, I'm in the training division. I spent a lot of time doing incumbent training too. And there was like, when I was a young firefighter, training was tough, right? Recruit training was hard and tough, and we were tough on people. And sometimes it was outlandishly, like, crazy. Like, it wasn't really decision making stuff, but it was at least stressful and tough. And when you came to company training, it was stressful. And I think that it done in the right way is beneficial.
Yeah.
And then we had this switch. We had this switch where I think we believed that in order for people to get something out of training or want to come to training, we needed to make it nicer. And it needed to be the atmosphere needed to be less stressful and more welcoming, which I think there was some of that where it didn't need to be so negative, like feedback that you give is people need to be able to come and make mistakes at training, especially in come at training, because that's where you need to do it and then, work through it. But we had years where I think training was too soft. And so if and you look at fighter pilots and some other military professions that are critical decision makers, and their model is they train in very stressful environments because that's where you're going to be making your decisions. And if your brain is not used to that, then you go right into tunnel vision, or not even tunnel vision, tunnel senses.
Yeah.
Your hearing, your sight, everything goes. And so you have to train your brain to make decisions in stress. So you can't just train people, you have to train them under stress. So we've gone back to Training is a very welcoming environment. We're not there to, and not necessarily there to test you. We're there to help facilitate training environments where you can come and perform under very stressful conditions, but it's okay to screw up. And then
Yeah.
we'll try it again. And so these last company evolutions that we did live fire training for all of our folks. I mean, we did some tough scenarios, and it was purposely set up to see how the company officers made decisions under stressful situations. So it wasn't just come to your skills, pull hose through a building, drag victims out. It was, this victim has jumped from the second floor, is laying outside on the ground, telling you that their spouse is trapped in the second floor, and you have fire and smoke on both floors. What do you want to do? And this is the only amount of people you have on the scene yet. Like, are you going to provide patient care to the one that's jumped? Are you going to BIS the second floor window? And how are you going to do it with the people that you have on scene?
Yeah,
And
what's cool about that is like it's like either option we're not saying is right or wrong.
yeah,
We just
and that's
want
what
you
we
to
were telling
think.
them. We want you to think, and we want to then talk through if you would have done something different,
Right.
or could you have done something different, and what are some other things in your toolbox, and some other ideas, and move on. Let's do another scenario.
Yeah.
And it the more we've done it that way, and we've started doing it with the recruits too, it I think it helps. I it's so crazy. And we told all of our folks this year at Company Evolutions, like, we never would have, like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the critiques that we're giving now are like nitpicky. Like, they're like, hey, think about this. Where 10, 15 years ago, it was, you threw the ladder upside down, dude. Like, it's like we've come
Yeah.
so far. Like,
Yeah, there's been a lot of great advances, and
yeah.
at the end of the day, we're doing a lot more with a lot less, responding to a lot broader of emergencies out there. But when it comes to the basics of what our job entails and how to go about doing that is, I think it's something for each individual to look at themselves and examine the organization on how we can start changing that and bringing that human aspect back into it, and really developing the critical thinking ability, through good training, and you know, not having to policy and procedure ourselves out of everything, and I understand there's organizations and there's city attorneys who probably require it. And I know there's other red tape that we're not discussing. I totally get it. Totally get it. It's not just, but we can like control within our organization alone some of it, and whether it be a little bit or a lot. But I do understand the red tape that's on multiple layers. Like, I totally get it. And it's just a societal thing. Like, look at everything that you're involved with outside of the fire service, too. If you have a part-time job or any other type of extracurricular activities that you belong to where you do some work, just look at how there's just a process for everything. And we just take kind of that human aspect out of it. Like, think about if we could get it back in. Like, I
Yeah,
think,
it's so funny. I was on the PTA for several years as a board member. I've been the vice president, the president, and the secretary of different PTAs, elementary and middle school. In elementary school, it turned over a lot. And so when I ended up being on the board of the PTA, I'd never been on the board. The whole board had left. There was no one with any experience. We had no idea what we're doing. So in the absence of not knowing, we just were doing what we thought was the right thing. And it went pretty good.
yeah.
I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing as a president. Like, I don't know. Well, come to find out, there's all this stuff I was required to be doing. I was not doing. So I go to middle school and I end up on the PTA. And the treasurer of the middle school PTA had been doing PTA for like 10 years. And she knew every regulation. And she's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I'm like, well, this is no fun anymore. Like, and she was like, well, you have to do this and you have to do this. And the council says this and the council says this and the council says this. And I was like, I liked it better when I didn't know the rules. So, but yeah, you're right. Everywhere is become that way. And I'm like, it's PTA, folks.
Right.
It's the PTA. Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy.
We don't need all this, And
No.
when you talk about that and you see it on that level, and you're just like, why? What are? Yeah, it boggles my mind. But again, I see why we got how we're here, why we're here, and I just don't know how to go the other way. Like, I don't. It's almost scary to think about, and especially in emergency response, disaster response, preparations, things like that. Like our mind is our strongest tool, you know, and you can't take that aspect away because then you greatly increase the risk of poor performance out there. I don't know. This is an interesting one for me. This is one that I think about a lot.
It is,
It's
and I've talked on here before about a disc assessment.
yeah.
We've done disc assessments for our leadership folks, and my disc assessment. So the blue category is like conform, like if you conform or not, and like how you feel about policies and stuff like that, and consistent, like how consistent you are and stuff. And my blue is like a 4, so low, because I just am always like, I'll just do the right thing, just do the right thing, like. And it's like I just don't fall into that, and it's so funny because I see folks that I work with that have very high blue, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
I see that. And they look at me like, you're just out of control. I'm like,
Right.
no, I'm just.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Like there's like everybody do the right thing, but we all know there's a lot of
People
people that
don't.
people
I
don't,
know, and
and
I live
it's
in this bubble. I know.
yeah, and
And
it's
some people, it makes them feel more secure
right.
to have some boundary like that. And I get that. I do, and I appreciate that. And I get that. Like, especially like if I was newer in my position and just coming into it, I would want a little bit more bumper, a little bit more, something like that till I figured it out. And then I'd be like, okay, let's go.
Can we tear these up?
Yeah.
We don't need them anymore. I'm good. So yeah, when you go out to your organizations out there and to our listeners, like, look, like I don't know how your policies and procedures are. Is it too much? Is it not enough? How are you building your future leaders and your firefighters to critically think? Like I think that's the great question to ask yourself, and look at yourself and look at your organization. Like, how are you doing that? How do you provide stress during training? And it's not just simply yelling at them and calling them names or making fun of them when they mess up, like legit stress to where they have to make some decisions. Look at these things on how you're doing that. And are there ways that you can improve some of that to really establish a better basis for what it means to critically think under pressure?
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely think there are good avenues to fix this. I do.
Yeah.
It's not a lost cause.
Yeah.
It's definitely not.
Yeah, it's a just like everything we talk about. It's going to take time and effort, successes and failures through it all. But yeah, it's definitely doable if the time and effort's there.
And I think, and we'll wrap this up now, but I think in the schools now, our young folks are being taught critical decision making a little bit more. And so I think it'll come along naturally too, as generations turn over.
Yeah,
Woo, Gen Z.
go Gen Z. One just a thought popped in. So, but one more. Do you think it's also a control issue? Like, because part of me does think that. And,
Oh, yeah.
you could look at generations, and we won't even get into the generation talk, but people like in leadership roles, as they move up, they feel like they have to control more. And they might have this sense that nobody is ever going to be as good as them at the job. So they have to take more control over it by implementing outlandish policies and procedures. Do you think that is a small part of it as well?
I think it is a control. It is partially control, but I think I don't know how to say this. Oh, I think sometimes the control comes too from lack of confidence. So
Yeah,
if I'm not
I
secure in
gotcha.
myself and I don't
I
know what
like
to
that.
do, I want to write it all down so that I know what to do and I can just follow this thing. And then everyone else probably doesn't know. If I don't know, they surely don't know. And so we're going to write it all down.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well put. That's a good point.
So I think it's probably both.
Yeah. Yeah. So that could be it too. But yeah, like I said, look at your organization, examine yourself, examine your training. The big question that I think you should ask yourself is how you're developing critical thinking. That's it. Like examine that question and look at what you're doing as far as developing yourself and your people and how are you doing that?
And if you feel like you personally are not great at critical thinking or thinking on the fly or changing things as you arrive and stuff, put yourselves in positions to practice it in stress, because I see a lot of people that they probably know that that's not a strength of theirs, but they shy away from chances to practice it because they're not great at it. And I get that. I get that. But put yourselves in those positions and have people set things up for you. Like, ask your chief, if you're an officer, hey, run me through some scenarios that are hard and give me feedback about it and let me screw up and let me fix it. And because that's how you get better. You have to practice it. You can't, it just doesn't happen.
Right. Yep.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. That was a good one.
Yeah.
I like it.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I'm not sure Kyle and I may take a couple weeks off for Christmas, for the holidays, and then catch back up after the first of the year. I don't know. We may get one more episode out between now and then. If not, have wonderful holidays.
As we wrap up another episode, this has been Kyle
and Carrie
from the Heat of Command podcast.
Thank you, as always, for listening. Please make sure to follow and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, we love the feedback. Keep it coming.
See you next time.